Thank you for joining me. My name is Gord Long. It's my pleasure to have with me once again, as we do every month, Charles Hugh Smith. Charles is a well-known publisher on the website and publisher editor of his site, of2minds.com. Of2minds.com. Welcome back, Charles.
Thank you, Gordon. Always my pleasure to be on the program with you.
I heard a little bit of audio feedback, so you're coming from Hawaii, so some of our new listeners just understand that we may have a little bit of delay on some of our transmission here today. How is the weather in Hawaii?
I have to say it's very pleasant, around 80, scattered clouds.
I'm not going to comment on what the weather's like in New England, but it has been milder than typical. More rain than anything, which is, at least you don't have to shovel it. Charles, I'm going to jump right in because we got a great subject here to talk about today on the new millennial generation and really trying to understand it, because there's no question that it's different in beliefs and values, and we'll go through that, than previous generation. And most importantly, that the size of it's quickly becoming a major influence on economic decisions and our economics in the country. And I don't think people fully appreciate that. Comments on that?
Yeah, it's a topic that has so many consequences. So I'm anxious to dig right in and go through your slides.
Yeah, Charles. I think it really came to light to most people during the U.S. presidential election, during the primaries, Democratic specifically, the amount of support that Bernie Sanders received from this particular generation. It was noticeable versus Hillary. And what was noticeable is Bernie Sanders' platform, very much far-leaning left. And whether that is just something unique in this generation, or unique at this particular primary, or whether it's in fact a belief system in this new generation, or whether it's even more practical. He was talking about forgiveness in student loans, trying to get education under control. And if you're a student and if you're that generation, that's got to be one of your number one concerns. It was talking about the importance of jobs and training. Hillary wasn't doing that, so it may be as much that as being more socialist leanings. Any observations you can make on that?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent introduction to the social ramifications, Gordon, is that, we all know that generations do have different value systems and different contexts because the world changes. And so you can't expect the next generation to have the same perceptions of what's important as the previous generations. And so we live in an economy with rising wealth inequality, which is also generational inequality. In other words, because the boomers got to buy houses for $100,000 and now they're worth $500,000, now millennials can't afford those houses. And the job market's changed. It's much more precarious. It's much more fast moving. And the pay scales, pay is no longer rising as it was in previous generations. So the millennials have a much tougher economic outlook. And so they're having to come to terms with that, and that will change our entire society for the better, right? Because you've got to adapt.
Yeah, as we'll talk about, they've had to accept, or what's been thrust on them are some changes that have been profound, and no other generations had to experience them. The explosion in what tuition and universities cost, just the general costs that they face. I remember I was talking to one. He says, "You have no idea what it cost me." And he was talking about the cost of a cell phone, all of his costs that he had. He says, relative to your generation, you have no idea, and the jobs aren't the same. They don't pay as well. And this particular person was right. Just so that everybody understands, Charles, some statistics here. The millennials, at least the best ones I have, are through 2015, using that as a benchmark. That would be anybody that would be aged 18 to 34 years old would be considered a millennial in 2015. And at that point, we had 75.4 million 75.4 million. The baby boomers in that same measurement, 2015, that would be age 51 to 69, were just 75 million. 74.9 million. So that we always talk about the magnitude and the size of the baby boomers, but the millennials are there. And in 2000, this year there'll be 36% of the workforce. 36% of the work this year, and within 8 years. Yeah, think of this as the next, a two-term presidential horizon there'll be 75% of the workforce. So that's how quickly this is going to change. And the other part too is that it's growing additionally in that there's so many. It's the most diverse, multicultural, language, ethnic group that we've ever had. More and more immigrants are of this age too that are coming in. And right now, already 15% of the millennials are multi-ethnic groups. Any observations you can make there?
Well, Gordon, I think that's a critical element in that statistically, I know that the number of immigrants that have come to the U.S. in the past decade is the largest since the 1900s, when the huge waves of European immigrants were coming to America in the early 20th century. So this is the highest levels of immigration we've ever experienced as a percentage of the population. And in terms of multi-ethnic children, in other words, there's a lot of interracial marriage now. And here in Hawaii, we call them hapas, like they're half. But actually, lots of people here they're 20% of this, 20% of that. They might be Hawaiian, Chinese, Caucasian, Filipino. And so when you get the mixed race children, they don't have the same ethnic identity. They have a new kind of identity that is transracial, if you will, that they don't feel trapped in one ethnic identity, right? So these are huge changes, and they're positive changes because if we can get away from racial profiling, that would be a plus.
Yeah, without question, and more accepting, and more tolerant than previous generations, and conversely less tolerant of bigotry, etc., which is really positive. So there's a significant change that's positive that's happening, and many positive things with the millennial generation. For the older crowd, some of them appear negative, but it is the reality of this new world that's coming. I've got a list here of at least 10 general changes that are pretty factually stated before we start to draw some conclusions of what this new generation might be leading to. But first up, what we're seeing is that millennials are definitely older in getting married, in household formations, and having children. Now that could be because of financial issues and trying to get stable, trying to find jobs, but definitely. And I read an article the other day where many don't think they're consider themselves adults until they're 30 years old, and more obviously living at home. But the family formations are much older, which in itself begs a lot of questions. Real estate, for example, just on making that choice. Does that match your observations?
Right, and I think it does kind of mirror what's happened in Japan. When you have economic stagnation, you can't afford to have your separate household, and so you can't afford to get married and have children either. So it's huge social consequence of that stagnation.
Another thing that certainly everybody's aware of this, the student debt levels are a defining point of this generation. No generation has ever experienced this degree of student loans and student costs to be educated. And this is a more educated generation than ever before. The number that not only have post-secondary school, undergraduate, but have postgraduate training. So the debt levels, which then economically also define their choices that they have in life, more so than any other previous generation. The family itself is any of the statistics I read, when I say family, they're tighter and closer to their family than ever before. There are many reasons and studies have suggested that, because parenting has changed. The parents are more involved. Parents are spending more time with their children, or trying to, than any other previous generation. More involved in trying to extracurricular activities, teaching with the school, etc. So the bond that they have with their families is stronger than ever before. That's another reason why, even after they're graduating from college, many of them are returning to the house. It isn't just necessarily economics. They don't want to leave and be long distances from their family. Have you noticed that?
Yes, I think that's a great social observation.
Sorry, Charles, I'm getting a lot of feedback on my end, and if you hear me stopping here, just let it catch up to us. The another thing is with that, the millennials appear to, and it's very noticeable, are rejecting looking at suburban life. Now, it's not just this comment on buying houses, but they're moving to urban centers in ways that we've never seen before, where they want maybe not the downtown core of a city, but certainly larger centers where everything's close by, where they can walk to things, where their friends are there, where their entertainment, the facilities are there. So maybe I have to, it's been New York and San Francisco, but now they're leaving there, rejecting it because of the costs that are too high. But any affordable urban center is very much attracting them, as opposed to previous generations. It was about suburbia that they went to, or it was right into the downtown core. Comments there, observations?
Gordon, I think this will have a profound impact on real estate valuations, and we're already seeing it in the desirable metro areas. The urban real estate costs are soaring, and you see stagnation in the exurbs, the distant suburbs. And I also want to mention this is not just in the huge metro areas of like Los Angeles or New York. It's also college towns like Columbus, Ohio, where there's the urbanization is revitalizing these urban cores, because the millennials want to interact with each other. They want an urban experience, even in mid-sized towns.
Moving on, Charles, the other so many defining characteristics of this generation that a previous generations never had. One, they've grown up with technology. From the birth, the internet was arriving on the scene and was there. Computers were in the schools, basic training. It's more than that. It's not just the tablets. This is a generation that is all about the smartphone and all of the social networking and social media that's grown up. They were the drivers of it. They were the fathers of this whole movement. So I walk downtown Boston, everybody walking by me has got their head down, and they're working on their phone. Or if I sit in a lobby somewhere waiting, 20 people are all working, younger people are all got their heads down. It's how they communicate with all their friends. It's just an integral part of our life. No other generation has even been close to this kind of acceptance and integrating technologies, understanding technologies, and integrating it in every facet of their life and taking it to the workforce.
Right. And, Gordon, we have two other topics on the economic ramifications, and they tie directly into what you just described, the technology, the social media, which is the impact on autos and transportation. The millennials are very comfortable with using Uber. They're comfortable ordering food and having it delivered by Uber Eats or other services. That's an integral part of their life. They don't necessarily all want to own a new car. A car share is fine with them. That'll have a huge impact on the auto industry going forward. And then retail, like you were saying, to a millennial, ordering a pair of shoes on Zappos is so much more convenient than driving 30 minutes to a mall and then having to find parking and all that stuff. It's like, if any kind of shopping appeals to them, it's boutiques downtown where they can socialize. It's more of the experience. And so no wonder we're seeing retail closing at a phenomenal rate, and the death of malls, which we talked about last month. But the technology is core to these issues. You can get rid of your personal car because now technology enables you to get an Uber, Lyft, or car share. And it also enables you to shop without having to leave your house. The package is delivered later that day or the next day. And if you don't like it, you can return it.
It's just natural for them, and retailers that have known that, like Amazon, are already there, and the rest are scrambling to catch up, and maybe too late in many cases. But
Yes.
it's just the way they think, and they now are beginning and will control our economy. This is not a fad. This is where we're going, and they will take this economy in that direction. They have that control. Every generation has that privilege and responsibility, I might add. Another key factor that is absolutely centered this generation is is terms of security, what they've faced. This is the generation that experienced 9/11 right in their formative youth. I've never seen that, and the amount of terrorist events that they have had to witness. This is the generation that has witnessed school shootings in unprecedented manner across America, and have seen it in their schools with security and safety and things and drills that they've had to experience to protect themselves that previous generations never experienced. They've watched friends of theirs, classmates, join up and serve in Iraq and Afghanistan and various tours of duties. These are their classmates. Previous generations hadn't seen this since the Vietnam War, which was short in duration, considering we've been in Middle East since 1990. Their entire generation, this country's been at war in some fashion in the Middle East. They have experienced with their parents the insecurities of downsizing, right sizing, outsourcing that started with the dot-com era, and seen the instabilities in, in parents trying to keep their jobs and trying to keep their income. So there's this sense of insecurity or searching for security that is probably higher in this generation than ever before, rightly so, for what they've been subjected to, and they've handled it extremely well. But it guides their core thinking. It's like children of the Depression never got over the Depression. These are children of some very traumatic things that have happened in this country. Comments?
Right, Gordon. I think you described the sense of insecurity from global terrorism, but also it's also part of the economic insecurity that, as you say, they experienced basically two recessions. If they, the 2000, 2001, and the 2008, 2009. So they have a lifetime experience of how precarious the economy is. And so that informs their political and economic viewpoints. And one of the things I've read statistically is they're a saving generation. They're saving at a higher rate than previous generations because of the insecurity they see. And so we're seeing these profound changes in the bedrock of American economy. Here's a generation that isn't that attached to automobiles. So that was a bedrock of the U.S. economy, is private vehicles, right? They're not so enamored with suburban living. That was the whole economic growth of America from 1946 on was all based on building tens of millions of houses in suburbia and basically stripping people out of the city cores. Now we're seeing a reversal of that. That's going to have a profound impact on renting and home ownership. And then the death of retail. I mean, as discussed last month, America's completely overbuilt with retail space and office space, and there's a huge amount of debt perched on this precarious oversupply. And then now the millennials, they like to work at home. They work at home quite often, so you don't need huge office buildings, and they prefer to shop online, so you don't need tens of millions of square feet of retail space. So they're gonna these changes can't be you can't deny that they're happening, and you can't say that it's going to go back to the good old days, because it's not.
I don't know if they were good old days, but maybe they were considered more stable. But these are natural progressions that we'd expect. I think you just summarized really well, Charles, the real three biggest social changes that are economic changes that really come out of all of these individual trends that we've witnessed within this group. That summarizes what to expect without speculating too much or drawing too bigger conclusions. The other side of this too is there's a sense in this generation of entitlement, maybe on a slightly negative course, where they believe that uh, that they deserve a certain level of lifestyle. I didn't say to be rich or anything else, but that they deserve to have a lot of the comforts that are part of the American dream. But the question is, because they've been treated that way, they've lived at a fairly high standard of living. Their parents they've never really went without. They've never some of them have, I understand, in broken marriages, etc. But they have this sense of entitlement. And where I'm going on this is when you get into countries that slow down and things are difficult. I saw it when I was living in Europe. Things were sort of all right, but it becomes much more socialist. You become much more dependent on the government. Your expectations, the government creep suddenly gets involved in everything in your life, not just the social net, the from a health and education, but in all sorts of regulations and rules. And you eventually just expect the government to be doing certain things. And with that entitlement, you expect the government to be supplying and taking care of you. I may be overstating it, but I know when I moved to America, my first time that I came to the country, my observation was so stunning that I'm amazed. I says, people don't talk about that the government's going to do this or the government's going to do that. They talk about, well, we need to do this and we should do this. I says, where I came from, it was always, well, why isn't the government doing that? Because one was more socialist, one was more capitalist. I will say now in America, I hear the government should be doing this, the government should be doing that, more than I've ever seen it before. And this new generation, I'm hearing the same thing in. So I think there's a shift towards much more socialism. That's what we saw with Bernie Sanders potentially, um, and some of their belief system that even through the educational system is not teaching them, instructing them as well on capitalism versus socialism, and some of that education is not there. So it's not really their fault. It's part of this education that's really going on, or lack of education in some ways. Good or bad, it just means that's the possible changes that we could see. Comments there?
Yeah, it's interesting, Gordon, because I think we all see the generational change in the expectations of what the government should do, but at the same time, the millennials are also keenly aware that Social Security and Medicare may not exist for them, and that's why they tend to be savers. In other words, while they expect more from the government and would like the government to be to address the inequality that's rising in America, they also understand the limits of government, and that's why they're personally saving, and their expectations of their own retirement are extremely low. So they're quite realistic in that regard, and so they are going to have to go through a reset, as we've discussed for years here. The financial system of the U.S. has to go through a reset, right? And there's going to be some losses of wealth and income, and there's going to be some sacrifices required. And we don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but the millennials will be front and center of that reset.
I think the real question on the table is a springboard from what you just said, Charles. We're a 70% consumption economy in the United States. There's nobody even close to us. And because of the materialism, whatever, the American dream, strong economies, and wealth, we've been able to live at that level. Can the millennials now being the dominant generation, will we maintain being a 70% consumption economy? And as if we're saving more and spending less, if the wages aren't growing, productivity is not growing, it's by default. We can't sustain that. And even slipping from 70 down to 60% has profound impacts. And can this generation support the kind of debt structure that's already been built into the system that they're now inheriting? Is the big question. The hurdles that this generation is going to face are daunting, are truly daunting. And I'm glad it's the most educated society we've ever produced, because they're going to be challenged to the hilt to figure out how to solve some of these problems. Observations there?
I think that's an excellent summary, Gordon. In that, and then the last thing I would add was the big question for us as a nation is it equitable for us to dump all this debt onto the millennials? In other words, is it equitable? Is it fair? Is it socially just? And I think common sense suggests the answer is no. Generations shouldn't pass on incredibly burdensome levels of debt to the next generation. That's wrong. That's morally wrong, and financially, it's unsustainable. So the millennials are going to have to deal with that inequality and unfairness straight up. In other words, there isn't going to be another kick the can for another 30 years. That's not going to work. We're not going to be able to kick the can for another 30 years. So it will come down to their political choice of how we deal with this.
Charles, we have to break. Great. There's a lot more, and we've flown over this one pretty quickly. I sincerely apologize for the audio problem we've been having here today with the satellites, and to our listeners. So next month, maybe you'll be back in the U.S. possibly.
Yeah, I'll try.
Okay. Any last comments you'd like to make as we close?
Feel free to visit me at of2minds.com. I've written a lot about the educational debt problem, and so check it out.
Thank you, Charles. Talk to you again.
Thank you, Gordon.